I know coming up in the main event this weekend, you have a heavyweight chart topper, but really I think the bantamweights are going to steal the show. And we've got a great one as the curtain jerker on the prelims, Johnny Munoz Jr. taking on Jamie Simmons. It's Kid Kvenbo taking on the Afro Samurai. And I was really excited about both of these guys' UFC debuts. For Jamie Simmons, it was on incredibly short notice, taking on one of the most polished strikers you're going to find in all of MMA against Giga Chikadze. And what happened? Well, Giga kicked him in the head and knocked him out cold. So you don't really love to see that. And for Johnny Munoz Jr., he took on Nate Maness in his debut, and it was a weird fight because, listen, I had a hard time scoring it. Johnny Munoz had a heat-seeking missile for Nate Maness' well, really for his balls, and he ended up cup checking him in the first round, in the second round, in the third round.
It was uncomfortable.
The referee finally had enough and just ended up taking a point. So I'm going to read you the MMA decision scored by our fellow MMA media members for that fight because they were really all over the place. Ultimately, there were 3 29-26s for Munoz, being that he would have won every round and won by a 10-8, but ultimately, again, the point deduction. You had a 29-27 Munoz, you had a 29-28 Munoz, you had 4 28-28s, you had 3 28-27 Maness's, you had 1 29-27 for Maness. Ultimately, Nate Maness wins that fight, and it was just a really weird one from a scoring perspective because for Munoz, he goes for takedown after takedown. He ends up going 2 for 16 in his overall takedown attempts. It was really weird trying to watch that one because for Johnny Munoz, he's known specifically as a grappler. He finishes the majority of his fights. He had 9 minutes and 42 seconds of control time in that fight. Now, a lot of that was spent pressing Maness up against the cage. And the reason why some people might have thought that Maness won was because those little rabbit shots in close, in tight. And that's how he was able to pull away in terms of the total strikes. Significant strikes favored Munoz in that one. And the last one that I want to leave you on, we talk about how this guy is a ground fighter. He is a 10-time NABJJF gold medalist. He's also a 3-time no-gi world champion, blue belt, purple belt, and brown belt. And he won the Grapplers Quest Championship. For Jamie Simmons, same thing. He is a grappler at heart, former wrestler over in Wisconsin in university at Stevens Point, and we've seen that in every single one of his fights. He's kind of wonky. He goes for a lot of takedown attempts. This is a grappler's paradise type of fight, but it's from 2 different spectrums, 2 different ends of grapplers. So what are you thinking about this one?
This is a really weird fight because this is kind of an entry level, and I won't say clash of styles, but I do agree with you. It's a clash of styles in the way that they do grapple because for Johnny Munoz, he's a weird kind of character. What I didn't like in his last fight against Nate Maness was that he was just kind of comfortable with the control over the damage, and that was the problem. You really can't make a good argument that either guy won that fight, and that was my real big problem with it. You know, like, if you want to say Maness won, I guess, like, the slight amount of damage that he did do was probably more than what Munoz was able to get off, but Munoz definitely controlled where that fight was taking place more often than the two, so it's just really hard to separate either guy in that fight. And the other thing that you really have to take from this fight is that you can't judge either guy just based off their UFC debuts. I'm going to throw you under the bus maybe a little bit because you thought Jamie Simmons was going to be an interesting matchup for Giga Chikadze.
I thought the wrestler versus the pure striker, that's what would have made it interesting. Now, the one other thing you have to throw with this one, Jamie Simmons is definitely not a featherweight. They even said it in his fight against Giga Chikadze. John Anik basically says, you know, he's coming in. He's mostly a bantamweight. He wants to make a mark at featherweight, stick around at featherweight, and this is a guy that got a 4-fight deal to come in on short notice to fight Chikadze, so we burned one. This is the second one. For Johnny Munoz, his last fight was at featherweight against Maness, but he traditionally is a bantamweight, former King of the Cage bantamweight champ. So I think you're going to get a natural idea of where these two guys are at because they'd be small featherweights as is.
Oh, without a doubt, that is a very good point. For me, this is really going to come down to how well can Jamie Simmons use his unorthodox movement, because he does fight in a very wonky way. He's kind of like Spike Carlisle, not really, but just in the way that, like, he does a lot that you're not really expecting. And with Simmons, he will kind of throw some of those Ryan Hall type kicks to try to set up some of his takedown attempts, and he is somebody who isn't afraid to throw like a spinning back fist and then try to power double leg you against the fence. It is all very unorthodox, but that's where he does get a lot of his success from. If Simmons is getting takedowns early in this fight, I do expect Munoz to tire as this fight progresses. And the thing about Simmons is that the fact that he does a lot, does really well, tend well to his gas tank. I do feel like Simmons will be the fresher fighter between these two, especially if it does go late. The thing with Munoz is, if he does get taken down and he is able to sweep off of his back, then I feel like this fight will be somewhat trivial for him. Because with Munoz, he's the type of guy, do you really want to take him down to begin with? Personally, I don't think so, but I don't think Jamie Simmons can do enough with sort of his pitter-patter game from the outside to really separate this one on the feet. So personally, I really do think Jamie Simmons is going to have to shoot for, I won't say a Colby Covington level of takedowns. He's not going to go for like 20, but he's at least going to have to go for 5, 6, 7 takedowns in a 15-minute fight, and those are all going to be good opportunities for Johnny Munoz to try to go for like a judo hip toss off of one of those takedown attempts, look for a guillotine off a takedown attempt, just opportunities to get Munoz's arms around him, and that's where Munoz is at his best.
That's the craziest thing. I mean, for Jamie Simmons, you want to go back and see a wild fight when he took on Jake Childers, not Tyler Childers, not the wildflower guy, the guy that sings and makes music, but when I look at him, he had that crazy fight in 2019 where he gets knocked out and submitted in the same fight. Pretty weird. You hate to see it. His last fight at bantamweight was back in 2019. And for Johnny Munoz Jr., and it can be said for both of these guys, I had to add up the totals. Out of their respective wins, this was their combined opponents' records. It's not good at all.
No.
It's 40-37 for Munoz Jr. It's 50-42 for Simmons of his 7 wins. And for Munoz, he has 10. So maybe not the highest level of competition for both of these guys moving up. For Jamie Simmons, he's going to have the familiarity of a fellow training partner also competing on this card in Ode Osborne, both guys out of Pura Vida BJJ, and a former Fight Night Picks member and friend over on the Instagrams, Hot Take Kate. She works out of Pura Vida BJJ. You can find her on some of the older recaps. But Matt, when I had a look at the odds for this one, they dropped and changed off the bat. Johnny Munoz opened up a -150 favorite. He's -238 right now. For Jamie Simmons, opened up a +130. He's +191 right now. It's a surprise to us as it is for you. I'm going to scroll down the page. I haven't looked at the Tapology votes yet. 837 votes, 91% Munoz, 62% by decision. For the 9% that have Simmons, 47% by decision, 33% by knockout. I have a weird time with this one again because Jamie Simmons is one of those guys that can mount a wrestle-heavy offensive. Like I said, he wrestled in university at 2 different weight classes, 149 and 157. So if you think he's small at featherweight, he's pretty damn small competing at some of those weight classes. But again, not cutting as much weight. You don't have to worry about it near as much. Munoz is going to have that size advantage in the cage. But for both of these guys, their striking defense, not the best. For Johnny Munoz, he's the type that likes to keep his arms out. That's his best striking defense. When a guy starts hitting him, he just puts his hands out and keeps his head there. And when he moves in on guys, he keeps his head on the center line. The other thing that Munoz does, he throws a lot of kicks. He throws them to the body, he throws them to the head, he throws them to the legs. But that's about it. His boxing, not so much in combination, and that's from watching all the way up through.
It's a lot of single shots, yeah.
With King of the Cage, that's primarily where he spent his time coming up through. For Jamie Simmons, movement is his best defense. I think that's what you can say for him. So he kind of does get a little herky-jerky. If you back him up, he gets a little straight. You saw that against Chikadze. So ultimately with the pick, I have a little bit of a hard time here. But again, I like Munoz because if Simmons is going to take him to the ground, well, Munoz is going to be good off his back, so I like his jiu-jitsu in this fight. For that reason, I'm going with Munoz here.
That's the thing. You bring up Jamie Simmons' movement being his best form of defense, and I agree with that. But the issue is that he's using that movement to then set up some of his own takedown attempts. And just the fact that he will be initiating the grappling against a guy like Johnny Munoz Jr. tells you all you need to know. I don't think Munoz is the guy who you take down whatsoever during a fight, and I do think that that's going to have to be a key for Jamie Simmons. At least mix in the takedown. Maybe go for some of those old school like Cowboy versus Nate Diaz where he did that like weird kind of V hip toss. Just try to mix it up on Munoz. Don't let him get comfortable, especially in the grappling department. But I do think Munoz will be able to win this one if it does turn into one of those wrestling grinder type fights.
We'll have to see. And Jamie Simmons, hey, Johnny Munoz likes the high single leg, so you just got to watch out for that one. Push the head down. He knows that. And if you see Jamie Simmons win, it's going to be a lot of top pressure. It's going to be a lot of ground and pound. I don't know how well he's going to be able to fare in that respect. Matt, both of us going with Johnny Munoz to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight. Is it going to be Munoz out of California? Is it going to be Wisconsin's own Simmons? I can't wait for this fight. And our bantamweight co-main event, Jose Aldo taking on Pedro Munoz in the main event. Interim gold on the line. It's a shot for the belt. It's Derek Lewis taking on the former training partner of one Francis Ngannou, Cyril Gane. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.